Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Friday. It's the last day of the week. We've got Q and A's, question and answers to the right of me. QAs. Make sure you check out the QAs. What's the destroyer of the whole world? Humanity. Absolute corruption, pollution, destruction is caused by the populace. What country has the biggest population? What country has the biggest population? A328. How do empires begin? There's a question for you today before you go off into the mist. Amidst my academic studies, amidst amid my academic studies, we have QAs. So there you go. There's QAs for today. Page 148. Atlantic systems and the beginnings of empire. For the rest of this section, we will examine the area where English settler colonisation began in North America, around the estuary of the Chesapeake River, in what settlers called Virginia. When English colonists arrived at Jamestown in 1607, they failed to locate any natural minerals and that would generate easy wealth. Death rates were high, and many of the original colonists died of starvation. More sustainable agriculture was needed to feed the colonists and to generate wealth. By the early 1620s, colonists had turned to growing tobacco, although the market was dominated by Spanish. Colonial growers' tobacco consumption rose sharply by the end of the decade, alongside a coffee house culture in England. This boom was accompanied by a crop in prices. Chesapeake tobacco could be produced more cheaply than the Spanish version, and although prices fluctuated widely throughout the next country, tobacco remained a staple product of Chesapeake throughout the colonial period. More land was required to produce both food and cash crop like tobacco, especially at the scale required to make profit. Colonial encroachment increased conflict with the neighbouring Powhatan Confederacy. A large alliance of Algonquian tribes defeat the Algonquians become key to the survival of the Virginia colony. You can see this shift from negotiation to confrontation in the way that colonial experiences were being narrated for people back in England. This is the engraver, Robert Vaughan's remaining of some of de Brye's imagery from the late 1580s, published alongside John Smith's extremely biased account of his experiences in Virginia. Notions of hierarchy extending beyond deteriorating relationships with neighbouring indigenous nations, Africans were amongst the first waves of arrivals onto the shores of Virginia. By 1620, colonists expected different labour arrangements from people they called Negroes, and those were Christian servants, unlike European indentured servants. Africans can be held in servitude for up to 90 years in Virginia. Lifetime slavery in all but name. Before tobacco cultivation became the primary economic driver in the colony, African indentures were relatively uncommon. But with the adoption of the plantation model and following the example of English colonists in Barbados, African labour was characterised as lifetime and then hereditary enslavement. Between 13,000 and 20,000 enslaved Africans were brought to Virginia and Maryland between 1619 and 1697. Some had worked on Caribbean plantations, but the majority were discreetly transported from Africa or via brief stepover of the Caribbean. People from the Bright Biafra made up around 39% of the captives brought to the Chesapeake. Another 20% came from each of Congo and Senegal. You recall the Abba Suleiman Diallo was captured in Senegal and brought to Maryland. The remainder that the Widar Gold Coast in 1698, English Parliament ended the Royal African Company's monopoly of the African slave trade with the English Empire. As a result, the number of Africans transported to English colonies increased dramatically, making England the largest trafficker of slaves in the Atlantic world. By the turn of the 17th century, the colony of Virginia had joined that of Barbados as entirely dependent on the peculiar institution of slavery. As in Barbados, the growing number of enslaved men and women in the Virginian population was the threat to be controlled. Get in the cage. What's he doing again? Get in the cage now. In there, cage. Virginia population seen as a threat to be controlled. In 1705, after several other legal and social measures designed to control enslaved labourers, the House of the Burgesses passed in the Virginia Slave Code to codify a slave society along the lines of what existed in Barbados. The activity contains excerpts of articles from the 1705 Act concerning servants and slaves. The Act consists of 41 articles in total. You may find some of this material distressing. Remember that this sort of legislation gave legitimacy to customs already in practice and illustrates the fears that colonists had about the social order they themselves had created. So, when you are reading the excerpts, ask yourself the following questions. What do they tell us about common law fears? How did this law reinforce inferior social, economic, and legal existence for enslaved people? What options did enslaved people have to escape slavery? Be it enacted by the Governor Council and Burgesses of the present General Assembly, and if it is hereby enacted by the authority of the same, that all servants brought into the country without indenture, if the said servants be Christians and the Christian percentage and above 19 years of age, till they shall become 24 years of age and no longer, and also be enacted by the authority. As for said, it is hereby enacted, and all servants imported and brought into this country by sea or land who were not Christian in their native country, except Turks and Moors in amity with Her Majesty, and others that can make due proof of their being free in England or any other Christian country before they were shipped in order transportation hither, shall be accounted and be slaves. As such, be here bought and sold, notwithstanding a conversion to Christianity afterwards. That a slave's being in England shall not be sufficient to discharge him of slavery, with other proof of his being manumitted there, and the further Christian care and usage of all Christian servants, be it also enacted by the authority aforesaid, and it is hereby enacted that no Negroes, mulattoes, or Indians, although Christian or Jews, Moors, Mahometans, or other infidels, shall at any time purchase any Christian servant, nor any other except of their own complexion, or such as are declared slaves by this act. And if any Negro, mulatto, or Indian, Jew, Moor, Mohammedan, or other infidel, or such as are declared slaves by this act, shall notwithstanding purchase any Christian white servant, the said servant shall IPSO facto become free and acquaint from any service in due, and shall be so held, deemed, and taken. And if any person having such Christian servant shall intermarry with any such Negro, Mulatto, or Indian, Jew, Moor, Mahometan, or any other infidel, every Christian white servant of every such person so intermarrying shall is both facto become free and acquit from any service then due to such master or mistress, so intermarrying as aforesaid. And also be it enacted by the authority as aforesaid. And it is hereby enacted that no person whatsoever shall buy, sell, or receive of, to, or from any servant or slave any coin or commodity whatsoever without the leave, license, or consent of the master or owner of the said servant or slave. And if any person shall contrary hereunto without the leave or license as foresaid, deal with any servant or slave he or she shall offend in, shall be imprisoned £1 a month without bail or main prize, and then also continue in prison until he or she find good security in the sum of £10 current money of Virginia for the good behaviour for 1 year following, wherein a second offence shall be a breach of the bond, or moreover shall forfeit and pay your times the value of the things so brought, sold, or received to the master or owner of such servant or slave, to be recovered with costs by action upon the case in any court of record in Her Majesty's colony and dominion, wherein no assigned protection or wager of law or other than one impotence shall be allowed. And for further prevention of that abominable mixture and spurious issue, which hereafter may increase in this Her Majesty's colony and dominion, as well by English and other white men and women intermarrying with Negroes and Mulattoes, as by their unlawful coition with them, be it enacted by the authority as foresaid, and it is hereby enacted, that whatsoever English, or with white man or women, being free, shall intermarry with a Negro or Mulatto man or woman, bond or free, shall by judgment of the county court be committed to prison, and there remain during the space of 6 months without bail or main prize, and shall forfeit and pay £10 current money of Virginia to the use of the parish as foresaid. And if any slave resist his master or owner or other person by his or her order correcting such slave, and shall happen to be killed in such correction, it shall but not be counted felony, but the master, owner, and every such person so given correction shall be free and acquit of all punishment and accusation of the same, as if such incident had never happened. And also, if any Negro, Mulatto, or Indian, bound or free, shall at any time lift his or her hand or in opposition against any Christian, not being Negro, Mulatto, or Indian, he or she so offending shall, for every such offence proved by the oath of the party, receive on his or her bare back 30 lashes, well laid on, cognizable by justice of the peace, that county wherein such offence shall be committed. And also it is hereby enacted and declared that baptism of slaves did not exempt them from bondage, and all the children shall be bond free according to the condition of the mothers and particular direction of this act. These systems of enslavement were a feature of the British Empire in the Americas. They become an integral part of the Columbian exchange of goods around the Atlantic, and enslaved people trafficked through the Middle Passage were themselves part of this exchange. The beginnings of an empire in the Atlantic cannot be disentangled from the beginnings of a particularly brutal form of slavery, which developed from ancient beginnings in Africa to a thoroughly modern industrial form of labour exploitation that would shape experiences of empire in the Atlantic and beyond. For the faint, the Portuguese intruders represent a threat to the dominance of inland trade routes. For this reason, fancy traders and kings prevented Portuguese and other Europeans from settling beyond coastal areas. They also wanted to protect their interests against competition from African neighbours. There was a lot of tension between the forest, coastal and inland Islamic kingdoms and empires. The Fanti also might have wanted to exploit tensions between European traders, particularly the Portuguese and the Dutch, and later the English, so that they could extract better trading conditions. For the Portuguese, security and accessibility were most important, so they wanted to establish settlements and factories in the area where was easy ways to goods. Gold in Elmina and coastal trading routes, ideally and in enclaves, would be protected by natural defences, for example, located on high ground or an island. Sugar production transformed economic relations and around the Atlantic. Historians appear to agree on that by isolating 6 elements of a sugar revolution. Higman can evaluate how different historians approach the subject. The 6 elements indicating that an area or economy was undergoing a sugar revolution where a rapid shift from diversified agriculture to sugar monoculture, change from production of small farms and to large plantations, increased reliance and enslaved labour, settlement change from sparse to dense, demographic change from white to black populations, changing the value of output from low to high value per capita. He has read widely. This is a survey of a range of historical writing on the subject of sugar. Higman is fairly convinced there was a sugar revolution, but he tests this theory by examining a range of other historians' interpretations. Where sugar production created new forms of economic and social relationships, we can say it was revolutionary. Higman used the example of Philip Curtin's analyst to illustrate this argument. Revolution was not uniform, however. Curtin points out that sugar production affected Brazil and the Caribbean economies differently. Not all historians agrees on the connection between sugar and empire. A key point of disagreement is the explanation for labour shifts. Did sugar really create a labour revolution, or would labour patterns have evolved the way they did, especially racialized slavery systems with cultivation of other crops? B. Dry's this depiction of the Algonquins in Virginia is reminiscent of descriptions of the pagan ritual in Europe. They are shown as unsophisticated, but there is an absence of the savagery that would be later used to describe indigenous Amerindians. These are images of a tiny subset of the whole collection, but you can see how the bride deliberately illustrates the ways that the lives of the Algonquins were similar to those of English. Communal feasting celebrations, music and fishing were among other activities that the Debray audience could relate to. Importantly, Debray illustrates the Algonquins in conflict with others. White pictures and Debray's engraving to devoid of violence. They were made at a time when newly arrived English and Dutch relied on tolerance from local inhabitants. They were keen to downplay danger. There is no definite answer here because this is based on your own impression of the image. However, you might have noticed the absence of weapons, indicating peaceful people, the communal activities with a celebratory of cooperative atmosphere, and representation of dancing and singing, indicating rich culture. On the surface, this is a map drawn by Vaughan to accompany Captain John Smith's account of his colonisation of Jamestown. Like White and Debray, he is engaged in colonial propaganda. The map, however, seems less important than the illustrations of colonialists' encounters with the Algonquins. You can see that Vaughan's engravings borrow heavily from Dubroy's images of Algonquin society. However, you notice that in each of the vignettes, he has added elements of conflict that were absent in the originals. The dance at the feast in the figure 16.17 reappears in the top left corner of Vaughan's tableau, but the tone has shifted and it looks like Algonquins have captured the colonists that are threatening him with clubs. The violent imagery gives justification to the settlers for their attacks on Algonquin for the routine of treaty breaking. The juxtaposition of the clothed Europeans and the naked Algonquin Powhatans reinforces herarchies that imagine the Christian colonist as superior to the indigenous savage. Colonists were clearly afraid of resistance and rebellion by enslaved people. This suggests that such resistance was happening. Even the historical record doesn't always indicate this. Note in the article that killing an enslaved person might not be punishable by law, but even the prospect of mild physical threat from a non-Christian would be punishable by 30 lashes. The flip side is that colonists were not afraid of killing an enslaved person. This should tell you that they were confident that the supply of enslaved labour would continue. You can see from these articles the law focuses on two things, in particular religion and observable skin colour, as key modes of the differentiation, and they will feel of miscegenation, the sexuality between European women and enslaved Africans, but skin colour was the defining difference. The Noti article, which designates enslaved as a hereditary condition phased from other child. The slave code regulated the activities of enslaved people, but also those European and free colonists. Any disruption of the system of slavery, even by free settlers, would be punished by law. This made it extremely difficult to run away and resist the system. In March 1505, a fleet of 20 ships left Portugal to sail in the Indian Ocean. The command was Francisco de Almeida, who was appointed by the Portuguese king, Dom Manuel I, to be the first victory of Estado de India. This position gave him the full power to contract for us, and in a name, treaties and peace of friendship with all the kings and lords of India. Furthermore, we confer upon him our full powers to wage war and to order it to be waged by sea or by land against any of the kings and lords of India, whenever he may deem it. Almeida carried with him not only his vice-regal commission, but also a regimento, a detailed set of instructions for establishing a network of fortresses and trading factories staffed by soldiers and bureaucrats. This would all be answerable through the viceroy to the Portuguese crown. When Almeida sailed, Portugal possessed one fortress east of the Cape of the Good Hope and Kochi on the Malabar coast of the Western India. Within a few years, however, Portugal possessed enclaves along the east coast of Africa, on islands in the Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf, in Indonesia and China, as well as various ports on the east and west coast of India. From 1510, the headquarters of the Estado da India was in Goa in India, a city that would remain a Portugal territory until 1961, while the total amount of territory controlled by the Portuguese in Asia was never substantial. The impact of the Portuguese upon trade relations and religion was considerable. This raised the question of how a small, improvised kingdom of the western fringe of the mainland Europe could be established such a presence in a continent that included established and expanded empires such as those of China, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. In the 17th century, rival European powers challenged Portugal's control in Asia. Some of their territories, along with much of their control over trade, were lost to Dutch, another small European state, albeit one with established trading networks and sea power. The Dutch Republic, which declared itself independent in 1581, but only achieved official independence from Spain in 1648, had captured the Indonesian spice island of Ambon from the Portuguese by 1605. During the next 2 centuries, the Dutch, who come to control much of the archipelago, that is now Indonesia, along with other territories of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Both empires were established primarily to gain control of trade rather than land and populations. Controlled places and populations were a byproduct because bases were required from which to defend trade and attack trading rivals. This was giving rise to the concept of trading empires, indicating that the Portuguese and Dutch influence extended well beyond trade. Their presence made them regional powers, with whom other powers in the region needed to interact. These empires are, then, rather different from those you looked at in Units 5, 4, 5, and 6, which involved the control of huge areas of land. Both Portuguese and Dutch were smaller European powers and remained so despite the colonial activity in East Asia. But there were also important differences between them. How and why these apparently unlikely empires in Asia were established and maintained will be explored in the remainder of the unit. In the final section, brief comparisons will be drawn with 2 other European maritime empires that had presence in Asia, the British and the Spanish, to enable us to understand how European trading empires projected power in Asia.